So what we want to talk about is basically the importance of the kind of stuff that we're doing, how this whole business of quantitative, if you like, epidemiology has come along, how people have come to understand how disease worked, and and taking a sort of a bit of a historical look at it. Okay. Why numbers matter in public health. We're going to be looking at that. And hopefully this thing is going to work. Do I point it at that? Oh. Okay. And we're going to, the goals, what you'll see is the pattern of these lectures is that Steve Bellin has set up basically that the first slide always gives you a set of what we're hoping to achieve in the particular lecture that we're giving. So what we want to be looking at is looking at patterns in data. And then once you've seen the patterns, formulate some sort of hypothesis, and then build a theory and test the theory. That's the kind of way we want to go. And notice that it always starts, let's see if I can get this to work, it starts with the data. It starts with the data. The data is involved, and it ends with the data. This is the very important thing. Data, data, data. That's what we want to be thinking about. Okay. So, and if we want to have people that we would follow, we follow some of the greatest scientists of all time, and Albert Einstein will do until anybody greater comes along. And what he said is that the supreme goal of all theory is to make the irreducible basic elements as simple and as few as possible without having to surrender the adequate representation of a single datum of experience. All right, let's translate that into English. All right. We want to keep things simple, people. The art of this thing is not to build a mathematical model with 55 variables and something which nobody can understand. And perhaps not even yourself. What we want to do is to build it up we just put those bits into the model which we absolutely need and we can show we need. And when we can actually show that, look, we've built this model and it's got a small number of parameters in it, but actually there's something missing, at that point we put in another parameter. But we build it up from the bottom and keep it as simple as possible. But at the end of the day, what Einstein is saying, we actually have to be able to represent everything that's going on in the data. So we do want to do that, but we want to do it in the simplest possible way. That's the goal. So Brian talks about the 3 rules of good modeling. In particular, he's talking about really biological or biomedical modeling. But with all modeling, stay as close to the data as you can. And when it comes to biological modeling, you want to put in as much biology as you possibly can as well. So everything that you know about modeling, whether you're looking at HIV, or if you're looking at tsetse flies and trypanosomiasis, all the things you know that actually happen with the virus, or with a fly, or with a trypanosome, which you know actually happens from experiments that people have done in the field, you must actually put that should be in your model. If you can't explain that, then your model is not doing such a great job. And also basically keep it simple. Okay. Steve, have you got the control as well? Am I actually doing this, or is it just okay? Semmelweis. Who was Semmelweis? Anybody know? Nobody. Okay. So in future, mothers might say to their children, "Children, it's summertime. It's time to go and Semmelweis your hands." Semmelweis was a person, a doctor in Austria in the middle of the 19th century. Okay. Who was actually very keen on the idea that washing hands was important. Now, here is an amazing thing, actually, is that we're talking about somebody who lived in the middle of the 19th century and who has to bring to the world the idea that washing hands might be important. Now, a couple of thousand years BC, the Greeks were doing the most amazing amounts of mathematics. They were really, really advanced civilization. But it seems that either people didn't know about the importance of washing hands, or the idea was actually lost on them. But here we have it. We have Ignaz Semmelweis, who's a junior doctor in the Vienna General Hospital. And he finds that there are quite extraordinary rates at which women die of puerperal fever. It's basically that they give birth, and then large numbers of women actually, mothers actually die. And this is driving me crazy. Okay, that's great. So that's now it's done 2. All right, at least it goes backwards. Good. So what we have here is just a little graph, and there are 2. We'll become clear why we've got two graphs here. But essentially, what this is giving is the mortality rates of women in hospitals having just given a baby. What proportion of them die? And basically, that says what it says here. We've got somewhere in the region of, sometimes over 5, not quite 10% of women dying. 1 in 15. Does that sound like a lot of people, or quite a small number? What's your name? You're Catherine. Okay. And I mean, what would be an acceptable level in 20th century? Where do you come from?
I'm coming from Penn State University, but trained at Michigan as an epidemiologist.
Okay. So what would be would you expect would be the rate at which women die after childbirth in Pennsylvania?
In Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Oh gosh, it'd have to be a denominator with 6 figures in it, I hope, at least.
Right. Okay, so how many per 1,000 might die?
Per 1,000? Really low. 1 to 4 per 1,000, but I think it'd be lower than that.
Less than 1 per 1,000. Okay. And so here what we're talking about is someone in the region of 70 per 1,000 women. Now, it's actually quite an interesting thing just to think about, is that presumably people at that time would have thought, well, that's just one of those things. That's what happens. Childbirth is a dangerous thing, and we have to sort of accept that, yes, indeed, more than 5% of women are going to die when they have a baby, and that's sort of tough luck. In the 22nd century, people might be thinking, I mean, we sort of think we're very advanced one thing or another, but they will be laughing and saying, do you know those people in 2017? They thought it was inevitable that you died of old age. Isn't that funny? So we laugh at, we think it's pretty crazy, but the trouble is people kind of accept that this is the way things are until somebody like Semmelweis comes along and says, no, there's a perfectly good reason why people are dying like this. They're actually dying of infection. People literally did not have this sort of idea. But he basically said, well, what he did notice was that there were a couple of wards. I guess perhaps doctors were extremely busy or one thing or another, so they had some wards where there weren't any doctors allowed in. It was run entirely by midwives. So what we've got here is we've got a red curve and we've got a blue curve. And here on these wards there were doctors and midwives then, but now in the red wards there were only midwives. And what happens? Somebody tell me. I'm asking really quite simple questions, but sometimes people actually find graphs really hard to interpret, so I'm going to be asking people, what does anybody notice about that? I want anybody to tell me. What do you notice about what happens between the difference between the wards where the midwives are there by themselves and the ones where there are doctors involved as well? Somebody tell me. You don't tell me, I'm going to start singing. Yes.
My name is Elisha.
Yes, where are you from?
From Nigeria.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Welcome.
So from what I'm seeing in the graph, I think for the midwives alone, there is a kind of reduction of the peak of maternal mortality. For the red.
Right. They seem to be lower in these wards. Yeah. So we got rid of the doctors, and suddenly our death rate's gone down. Is that good? Is that what you'd expect? No? Why not?
My name's Sinead. No, because you normally think that a doctor might have the expertise to help save, actually.
Right. Okay. And any ideas? People might have read this, but why might it be? Why might it be that having a doctor there is making things worse? They don't wash their hands. Okay.
More severe.
Sorry?
Maybe they see the more severe.
They see the more. Okay, so that is actually. Now, there's an interesting point. This might actually just be an artifact The reason that that you only call a doctor in when in fact the mother's in a lot of trouble, so they only get called in for the severe cases, and that's why there are more mothers dying there. All right. What other things what else might be involved there? Yeah. What's your name?
My name is Ali.
Ali?
Ane.
Sorry, Ane.
I know back then it was cultural amongst physicians to sort of not wash their white coats, so they would want as much blood, and it was kind of like a pride of a surgeon or an obstetrician.
It was a badge of honor to have a coat that was in blood. So you go and doing some operation, taking somebody's leg off, and the next thing you go without doing any washing, and you walk in and you deliver a baby. Okay, so that's another possibility. I mean, I like the other idea, but Semmelweis thought, well, there's something funny going on here. So he obviously had this idea that there was some problem going on. And then, in fact, one of his colleagues, Jakob Kolechka, is involved where he's working with one of these medical students, and he cuts his hand with a scalpel, and he dies of something which looks just like has got the symptoms of puerperal fever. Okay, and so Semmelweis has the idea that maybe we should start thinking in terms of that this is actually an infection. And so what he does, he managed to persuade these medical students to start washing their hands. So they start getting involved in washing their hands when they go in before they help with the delivery of babies. And what happens? Somebody else who hasn't answered a question. What do you notice after the medical students start washing their hands? Anybody hasn't talked to me? Yes. You are.
Center.
Hi, Rosetta.
In
In the center.
Yes.
Right.
So there is a reduction in the mortality rates. When now the doctors started washing their hands, there's a reduction, and then you could see that is sort of similar to when the midwives were in between the 1847 to 1850.
Right. Okay. So in fact, there's really not that much difference at all between the situation where we've just got the midwives and now where we've got the medical students as well. So there seems to be something which is going on. Now, what would you do with a person that's come along and it's actually managed to reduce in your hospital the deaths amongst women? What would you do for somebody on your staff who'd behave like that? Sorry?
My name is Vainant.
Hello, Vainant.
I guess you give him a promotion.
You give him a promotion. Yeah, that's a great answer. But actually, this was I don't know, it might well be that it's the same now, but what actually happened was that they fired him, okay? So, because he was not obeying orders. He was fired for criticizing his superiors, and I think in fact he died really quite young, and he may have died because I've got a feeling, Brian, Tom, that he actually wound up in an insane asylum, which is what happens to you when you work for a place where they fire you for having good ideas. Okay, so, I mean, sad sort of ending to the story, but it does seem that he was fired there, but it looks as if the medical students kept washing their hands anyway, and so here was just he didn't actually do any mathematical modeling. Let's just actually think about another thing here. What do you see about these, we've got dots here which are telling us these are the rates at which mothers are dying. What are these, what do you find funny about the fact that we've got these bars? What are these bars telling us? The lines, the vertical lines through the means, the estimates. Anybody?
Yes. Yes. The confidence interval.
Confidence interval. Okay. When were these studies done? Middle of the 19th century. Did anybody have confidence intervals in those days? What's a confidence interval telling us? Just in very broad terms. What does the word confidence mean?
I think normally the range in which when you have data in that range, you can be confident that it's accurate.
Yeah, okay. Sort of in broad terms, I mean, you're going to learn about this in much more detail, but it's basically telling you how confident can I be about my estimate. But did they have such things in the middle of the 19th century? Probably not, didn't they? Because it's, statistics is really quite a modern sort of science. So Brian's put those in, but the fact of the matter is that he sort of probably has the data, which they had, but they weren't able to say that. But the important thing is what it's basically saying is, yes, this estimate here is higher than this one down over here, but if you look at the size of the thing, we can be very confident that it really is a real effect that we found. But the important thing is with Semmelweis is that he saw what needed to be done and he did it. Okay, so we won't press that one. We'll press this button instead. Okay. Somewhere. This has got... What's that, Jim? Yes?
Why do you think there's no difference between the groups before 1837?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure, but my guess is that actually it would have been that there were midwives and doctors in both of them, but and in the blue that would have perhaps only been done by the medical students, but I'm not sure about that. But we'll.
They had doctors in both places.
Right. Okay. So that is the answer. Yeah. Okay. But good question. Thank you.
Kristen, say her name.
Kristen.
Kristen. Good, Kristen. Okay. Oh, by the way. Oh, Jonathan. Yes, exactly. While I'm trying to get this thing to move forward, there are two things I want to point out about these slides. Firstly, that there is down in the bottom right-hand corner here a number, so that if you want to refer to...
You can press this arrow too.
Okay, I'll do that. Yeah, let me just do that. There is a number down on the bottom right here, which if you are taking notes and you think, I need to refer to a slide, it'll give you the number here. We need to try and get those numbers a bit bigger. The other thing is that Brian has put, if you look up on the top right there, you'll see a little globe there. Now, if you're interested in reading about the people or some subject matter relating to the slide, then you go and click on, if you're on the internet, you click on that, and it'll take you off, it'll tell you all about Semmelweis, okay, or something important associated with that. All right, okay, let me stop stressing myself out and push some buttons. Okay, great. So, the point I made about the confidence intervals, as statistics comes along, so now we're actually able, with those data, we can actually come up with working out an odds ratio. And essentially what we're just sort of saying there is, so what we saw was we've got a certain death rate amongst in wards where we've got the doctors involved or the medical students, and another death rate where we have only midwives, and we can look at the odds ratio of one relative to the other, which just broadly speaking is basically saying what is the odds of the woman dying if she's got a medical student involved relative to one where there's only they're midwives only. And what you see here, so if you like, it's how much more likely are you to die in one situation rather than the other. So when, just to start off with, when we're down here, we've got medical students involved in both wards. Now we have moved to a situation where we've only got midwives in the red wards, and we see that it immediately sort of jumps up. We basically, you're 3 to 4 times as likely to die if there are medical students, doctors involved, and it can go up to anything like 5. And again, the confidence intervals are well above 1, so we're saying in broad terms, it's a highly statistically significant result. But once the medical students start washing their hands, then these numbers drop down to a level around about 1. Okay, let's sit there. Okay, good. So that's the kind of, that says snow. I don't think it's going to snow today. Perhaps, all right, sorry. No, we want to start talking about cholera. So again, we're still in the 19th century. And cholera was, I mean, it still can be a it is still an extremely serious disease, but in those days, could be really pretty disastrous. And again, people really didn't have a good idea about why it happened. and it's sort of kind of an acceptance. So sometimes there are certain areas, maybe they're swampy areas, maybe it's low-lying areas or whatever, where you're just liable to get cholera. It's just one of those things that's a fact of life. But then people started talking about, well, what might it be? And William Farr came up with the idea of the miasma, that it was really basically a matter of breathing in bad air. So that there was pollution, some manner of pollution in the air, which was actually causing the cholera. They didn't have any idea of a causative mechanism, but this is what it seemed to be. Now, again, we might sort of find this kind of funny, but think of a disease spread by mosquitoes. Give me a disease spread by mosquitoes. Dengue is one. Let's have another one. Yellow fever? Malaria. Okay. Now, where does the word malaria come from?
The word malaria?
Yes.
It's,
what's your name?
My name is Ans.
Ans.
Yes. From Madagascar.
Madagascar.
Malaria, there is a bad thing in air.
Exactly. Okay. Mal as in malevolent. Okay. Maladjusted, like me. Okay, so, all right, mal is bad, okay, and bad air, so the same sort of thing. So we've got the same kind of idea, all right? And is that the real, is the real cause of malaria bad air?
No.
Okay, what is it? What is it?
Plasmodium falciparum.
No need to show off, you know. No, that's great. Okay. So, and look, it looked like a perfectly reasonable sort of idea. And what he said was, here's the situation. And we'll see in the next slide, he was talking in terms of, if we've got a place which is high up in the hills, okay, people are throwing their rubbish into the river over there, but when it comes down to a town which is slightly lower, so it's accumulating the rubbish from town number one, and town number two throws their rubbish into the river, and it all goes down. So as you go down towards the sea, there's going to be more and more rubbish in the air, and one thing or another. And so we expect that what's going to happen is that the lower down, the closer we are to sea level, the worse will be the cholera. And so then he puts together this sort of nice mathematical model. And it's got to be true. I mean, you get a fit like that to data. This has got to be true, okay? What we've got here is when we're up in the hills, 300 meters, we've got no cholera at all. But as we're going down towards the sea, sorry, I know water should flow from left to right, but here we are. We're going along here, and we're going down towards the sea, and look what happens to the cholera. And we fit this very, very simple mathematical model, and that says, yeah, that's the problem. If you're down near the sea, you get cholera. If you're way up in the hills, you should be fine. Okay? What's wrong with this? Why? Do you think that's well, let me ask, is that a reasonable conclusion? First of all, do you think that's a nice, anybody think that's not a nice fit to the data? What your name is?
I'm Jeanette, I'm from the University of Nairobi.
Okay.
I think it's a good fit to the data.
Yes.
I think it's a reasonable association, but it's not causation. It doesn't, just because it's associated doesn't mean it's the cause. So that's what I would say about it.
I like that answer very much. Hands up anybody that does not like that answer and has got a better one. Hands up anybody who likes that answer. Yes, all right, so we are listening. That's great. Okay, so we can have something where we get a really nice mathematical fit to some data, and we think it's wrong. Well, maybe it's not wrong. It might be. We can have an association where it is actually right. There is also causation. It better be true. If we've got causation, we better be able to find a model which does actually fit the data. But the opposite doesn't work. We can fit the data, don't necessarily have the right sort of model. And a man called Jon Snow basically came up with the idea. He thought, this has not actually got anything to do with the air. might well be that Farr was somewhat right, that yes, you've got a lot more muck and filth sitting around when you're down close to the sea, but it's not actually to do with the air, it's actually to do with the water. And he had a chance to test this idea in 1854 when there was a massive outbreak of cholera in London and thousands of people died. And he had the good idea of actually getting out there and getting some data. Data. And what he did was something quite simple. Was the first thing he did, he just went and found out, where is everybody living? So this is Regent Street and Oxford Street. This is where I went that's Broad Street, Regent Street, where was it? This is where I went to buy all my Christmas presents for my family. So, yeah, this is London. It's much the same looking now. Yes?
8 minutes.
8 minutes to go. God, how did that happen? I'm having such fun. Okay. All right, so what he did was to look at this, and then he thought, well, because he had this idea that it was water. So the next thing he did was to look at where all the water pumps were. So here are the pumps where people are getting their water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And since I'm running out of time, what he did see was there's a pump here, which is very close to where everybody is actually dying of cholera. And he did the very simple thing of just going and closing that tap, and suddenly discovered that the cholera pretty much vanished, right? And he got the idea that it was actually something to do with that very tap. And he had no idea that what was actually the causative agent was. So again, we've got a correlation, if you like. And it was only really rather later when Robert Koch came along. But by the way, again, just like poor old Semmelweis who got fired, Snow got completely slagged off. Everybody thought he was a bit of a maniac. And when he died, I mean, he did other things, a lot of other things other than cholera. And he worked particularly as an anaesthetist. And so when the obituary in the Lancet basically said his researches on chloroform and other anesthetics were appreciated by the profession. That was it. That's all they had to say about the man who sorted out cholera. And it was only quite a lot of years later that Robert Koch basically showed that there was actually this the cholera organism, Vibrio cholerae, although in fact even in 1854, which was not too far away from the time when that great cholera epidemic happened in London, in fact an Italian, Filippo Pacini, had actually described it. So that one also just got missed out. This is what happens. And it did take until 2014 before the Lancet had the good grace to say that actually they really had made a bit of a mistake with, and really shouldn't have been quite so. And that wonderful British understatement were perhaps overly negative in tone, is what they said about the way that they'd slagged off Jon Snow when he was there. Okay, we're not going to have, and I think what I'm going to do is to actually leave this as an exercise and we can have a discussion about it. But there are all sorts of other things which have happened and how things have changed. And I mean, life has actually got an awful lot better in the last 100 years, let's be honest. If we actually look at the deaths per thousands per year for all-cause mortality in England and Wales, what we see, well, somebody tell me, what strikes you most, what really hits you in the face about these data? So what we've got, here is time along the x-axis, here are deaths per thousands per year. What actually strikes you first? There are a number of things that might strike you. I want somebody who hasn't asked me a question yet or given me a response. Talk to me. Is there anything? Do you say, oh, I don't really like those graphs? Yes.
I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
I guess the first thing I noticed actually was that the data was just based on male participants.
Oh, wonderful. I like it. I only care about males. Okay, good. Okay, but there's something else you want to say? Was that it?
I mean, I guess I also noticed that there was a decline in mortality on all of the graphs, but I wondered if the same would be true for women.
Okay, very good. Good question. Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
One thing I'm noticing after the decline is that the scales are not the same.
Ah, the scales are not the same. That's a wonderful thing. Okay, where are the scales massively different?
Well, the first top two are massively different. Scale of about 10.
This one here.
Top left in the middle.
Okay.
5 to 14.
Those are totally different. And where's the and who are these people?
0 to 4 years.
Okay, so they're baby, right? So we've got perinatal mortality, and then where else do we see these massively high numbers?
Massively high in the oldest age group.
I know, when you get to people like me, okay, start falling off the. You expect it there, all right, but okay. Nonetheless, but the interesting thing is that even in these really quite old people, we've actually got these numbers declining. So I want you to think about those slides, and while you're at it, you should also look at these ones here, where there are a number of other diseases where things have, these are particular things which have changed, and I want to ask you to come up with reasons why. And don't look at the slides below before you go through these things. So ask yourself, why is diphtheria? You don't even know what diphtheria is. Who knows what diphtheria is? You do. You do. But, all right. Anybody else? Anyway, Google it. Just have a look. It looks really nasty. But nobody, we just never hear of anybody getting it anymore, which is wonderful. But in the early 20th century, it was really quite a killer. And I pretty much run out of time. But there are a number of other things here. And you might like to ask yourself, why did polio suddenly come along and why did it vanish? Okay? Why did measles go like this over this period and then pretty much vanish? What happened to whooping cough and why did we have this little blip over here? Answer all of those questions. I'm sorry I've taken too much of your time, but I quite enjoyed it.
Can we go back? I have one more question for them to think about.
To go, the last slide?
The England men.
Sure.
There's the big spike in the 15 to 34-year-olds around World War
Right.
And why is there also a spike in the 5 to 14-year-olds at that time? Is that spike really what we think it is? And if not, what might it be?
Right. Okay. Yeah, there are a number of things to think about in here. What we do see is that we've got the good thing about it is we see a big reduction over there, but we have got some interesting, as Jonathan points out, some very interesting spikes. You might like to think about that. And we got some sort of idea about something like that. What you should do is Google and find out how many soldiers were killed in the First World War and how many civilians, and how long did that war last, and then ask yourself how many people died in the flu epidemic of 1918 and how long that lasted. Just have a look at that for interest's sake. Okay, I have run out of time. I'm sorry. There's some more interesting stuff here, but we can perhaps find some time to have discussions about it at another time. Thank you very much.